Okay, we will now start the second part of this seminar, which as said took the form of a panel with we have four guests representing four different kinds of professions. First, we have Ulrika Modéer, who is a member of the Green Party and State Secretary to the Minister of International Development Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Just sitting down there. And we have Kim Forss, who is an evaluation and development specialist. He works at anordnade, Tools for Thinking. We have Henrik Arnstad, who is a science journalist and a writer, and historian, also teacher at Handelshögskolan. He has written a lot of articles in our big papers. And finally we have Anna Liljelund, who is working for Develop, which is a consulting company working for sustainable social development. And Anna is working there as a project manager in the area of evaluation and results. And she is also a former co-worker at SIDA. You are all very welcome to this seminar, and we are as pleased to see you here as the book presentations earlier presenters. And now we will start by listening to the panelists. They will make an introduction, a short one, 10 minutes or so, and then we will open up the floor for more questions. And we will start with Henrik. Please.
Thank you very much. I feel a bit like the odd fellow here today, not knowing anything about international aid and so on and so forth. However, I'm very interested in the theories of power and so to speak. In the election of 2006, there was a TV debate between the two leaders of the main political parties, the Social Democrats, represented by Göran at that time, and Henrik Arnstad, and they were asked about politics regarding crime. They both wanted harsher punishments for criminals, longer prison sentences and so on and so forth. And the interviewer said to them, but we all know that harsher punishments doesn't lead to lower crime rates. On the contrary, it's very expensive, and it seems always, according to science, that it's counterproductive. And Henrik Arnstad replied that, well, there's more to life than science. And this is sort of the discourse in where we are today. We have a notion of science on one hand and politics on the other hand. And we have heard something about the minister meeting the field worker and acknowledging that I did not know this. The politician said to the field worker, knowledge and politics as two separate things. In May this year, there was a major article published in Dagens Nyheter, the major Swedish daily, where a few academics stated that they wanted a change in politics. They wanted not only that science would make input into politics before decisions were made, they also wanted some sort of scientific control of political decisions. They claim that knowledge must go before ideology and populism. And they were very sorry that experts were in control of politics, and they used the sentence of based upon evidence. They repeated the evidence 24 times in their article, but they never specified what evidence was really. But everybody knew it, reading the article. The message was that there is some sort of universal truth based upon science, which is in opposition towards politics and democracy. And the lack of evidence in politics was an example. The point they made that children aren't learning to read anymore. They can't read anymore because populism is controlling politics. And they pointed out an ideal society where the scientists were in control of pushing an okay stand upon political decisions. Now, this is, being an historian, this is a very, very old notion. It has its roots in antiquity. And the Greek states, there were such notions, an expert society, and it was, of course, very strong in the 18th century. Now, this notion of science and knowledge being separated to politics is, of course, wrong. There is no such thing. Even scientists go every day to the shop and they buy groceries and they talk to each other and they have a notion about everyday life. We are not living in a separate sphere. So there is a problem here, of course. But I would like to also point out that in modernity, political power has been based upon science, so to speak, that in older days, pre-modern times, God was the legitimizer of power. A king could say that, well, I'm di gratia rex, konung av Guds nåde. God has appointed me king of this country, and so you can't oppose to me, because then you're opposed to God. In modernity, that function went towards science. And the problem of science working in this way was that it's not many years later, 50 years later, 100 years later, our people can claim that this was bad science. This wasn't science at all. For instance, the Holocaust was based upon scientific principles of race biology. And there was no way in 1910 or 1920 for anyone to say that we know this is pseudo-science, this isn't real science, because it was real science at that time. And that science stated that you cannot mix races with each other in this way. The Germanic race is threatened by the Jews, by the Finns in Sweden, the Sami population, so on and so forth. And 50 to 100 years later, we can say that this is wrong. Putting that in perspective, today, for instance, when I travel a lot in Tanzania, modern day in Tanzania, where on one hand you have environmentalists claiming that we must protect the elephants from the ivory trade because that is hurting the elephants. And on the other hand, I know many cultural geographers who, when they go to scientific conferences regarding this area, they wear a lot of ivory all over themselves because they claim that these people have been able to manage ivory trade for 2,000 years, perfectly well organized. And today we're stopped from doing that by Westerners claiming that you cannot hunt elephants. I don't know if this statement of mine has been any value to you. This is my reflection upon today's conference, and thank you for letting me come. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Henrik, for putting this discussion on results and evidence within development aid in a larger perspective. It's obviously it's not just a question for aid, but for every area within society. Now we will listen to the next panelist, which is Ulrika Modéer. Please.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it's a bit difficult for me to reflect upon today's conference because I have not been here. But I will reflect on what I have had the possibility to read and how we in the new government look upon the area of results and change, transformational change. And I think that any area of politics would claim that it's a very complex area and that transformational change take place over time in a very complex way. And this is certainly true when it comes to development cooperation. At the same time, we have many experiences having worked with this area for more than 50 years now in the Swedish development cooperation. And I do think that we could find a good way in relation to what the former speaker said to really use experiences and research within the field. How do we find and work out good systems for achieving results, but through learning and in a cycle of good dialogue also with all the partners. And when we present our policy from the new government, we focus quite a lot on learning, and we focus quite a lot on those criteria that were mentioned and agreed upon in the aid effectiveness agenda and development effectiveness agenda not so many years ago. And the most important of them being local ownership. We believe if we're going to achieve transformational change, we need to base that on a local ownership. The change we want to see needs to be owned and seen and also affirmed by those who are the right holders and the ones that we want to support with our development cooperation. But we also then believe in order to have a good local ownership that we need to focus on alignment with local systems, if they are the state systems or local government systems or civil society systems. We need to coordinate much more as donors. And we need to be able to have good systems, but to look for long-term transformational change and to find ways of discussing on the way how things are developing. And I do think that it's an obligation also for us to look for results, but to understand that the results that we look for are perhaps not always the ones that we get, and then be able to backtrack and understand how change has happened and why this has been and how we should then relate our policies and practices with regard to the reality we work in. We need to strengthen local capacity as well, of course, as part of this, and this is why we also present in our budget and in other steering documents within the Swedish Development Corporation the importance of local institutions. We want also to make good use of our good Swedish institutions as partners in this work. Local statistics, for instance, has been a very important matter now, discussing how we should give the tools and support the developing countries to be able to work with regard to the new agenda for sustainable development goals. And this is also something that was discussed in the Addis conference on financing for development. So strengthening local capacities is, of course, also very important to be able to talk about local ownership. And then the matter of trust. If we're going to see transformational change, we need, as I said, work with a very good instrument of dialogue between partners over time, and to look for trust and to have a transparent and open dialogue on what we do well and the results we achieve and what we have not been able to achieve together. So I think that the trust in all relations and to build and to find a way to work with that is a very important key measure to see to that the dialogue works and that we have actually a very good learning process. And then, of course, we need to find a way to have a dialogue not only with, in our case, with our multilateral partners or government partners, but also to see the importance of accountability with regard to the parliamentarian system or with regard to civil society in the countries where we work. And I started to mention that I think that all areas in politics have a different kind of discussion with regard to this. And we're not alone in this, and therefore we have also decided within the government, and this work started up, I don't know if you had the possibility to hear about it or to discuss it here today, a work already last year on new public management and how this area of new public management and what has been sometimes described as a new obsessive measurement disorder, what have we learned from this period and how can we make good use of that learning, and also in between areas of politics see if there are experiences that we can make good use of. And I think also within the International Development Corporation we have a very important work to do also with other donors and to continue the discussion on this area, because it has been a very important discussion, and it has been a driver of change on how we work within our international development cooperation. And we as Sweden want to bring up that discussion and have it based also on the discussion we have within the government on the new public management system in the public field.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We will now listen to Kim Forss. Evaluation and development specialist. Whatever. Something like that.
Yes, and first of all, I'd like to say how much I appreciated the presentation before the coffee break. I really enjoyed the expositions, and particularly the review of how the results agenda has been brought to bear on SIDA over the years. And that made me reflect a little bit on what my own experience is with SIDA. And much as I really enjoyed your diagrams, Janet, you have of course done a lot of research for that, and I tried to sort of more impressionistically sketch the development of knowledge of results at SIDA, and it comes to be a fairly different kind of diagram, maybe supplementary to yours, but nevertheless. I've never worked for SIDA, but I did my first evaluation for SIDA in 1985, yes, 1985, and the last one in 2009, and in between I've done some 10-15 evaluations for SIDA. So I've often talked to SIDA staff about results and what results mean. It has struck me now that when I came to SIDA long ago and started talking about results, people would tell me about what happened on the ground in developing countries, about what happened in small-scale industries in Tanzania, what happened in programs for midwifery, network building in East Africa, building capacity in statistical agencies in Zimbabwe, and whatever, very concretely and specifically. When I come to SIDA now, and when I encounter staff now and ask about results, I more often get the response, but we don't really know, and the impact is very hard to measure. We don't really have the capacity to do so. Baseline studies are missing, monitoring systems are not really up to date, etc., etc. So it seems to me that there's actually been an erosion of knowledge about results over this 30-40 year period. That's very impressionistic, but let's suspend disbelief for a moment and perhaps consider why that could have happened. And I'd suggest a number of different factors around it. One relates very much to that there's now another style of working. People don't have that long field experience that they used to have. A program officer at SIDA for 20-30 years ago would often have been in the field very long and would have been working as experts, etc., in the partner organizations, etc. You had more staff in the field offices than you have today, far more staff in the field offices. And I think if you look at job descriptions, etc., people spend more time with partner agencies than they actually do today. They would be there visiting the statistics offices almost on a daily basis, traveling most of the time to the countries where cooperation took place, etc. And that, of course, builds knowledge about what's actually happening, makes you able to speak about it in concrete, practical terms. Then again, there's something I don't really know, but I would suspect that in the past you were supposed to know, and not knowing about results in the internal discussions would actually have been pretty bad. But there are those of you who were at SIDA at the time who know that better than me. That's one set of explanations, but there's also another set of explanations, and that's that in the past we were perhaps a little bit naive, but now you have to know more. We know more about the difficulties of impact assessment. We know how difficult it is to get evidence. So maybe just the standards of what you need to know before you say something about results is so much higher today, which is then a good thing and reflects a higher level of ambition in SIDA and in aid agencies generally. But what it boils down to is that the difference is that the discourse in the past was more concrete. People talked about capacities, for example, in the education sector, about education policy building, education systems management, producing textbooks in education systems, building schools, renovating schools, teachers' education, graduation systems, etc., etc. Whatever the subject was in different sectors. But those are the practical aspects of what results are. And hence people in the past tend to talk about results with actually using the results word. And that could lead one to think a little about, is there a problem with the word? What is actually a result? And if you go to the dictionaries, etc., you find that the result is a thing that is caused or produced by something else. So it's actually pretty meaningless unless you fill it with something else and explain what it is. And then when you start filling it with some other information, you may talk about, well, its effects, it's about impact, it's about effectiveness, etc., etc., its outputs possible. But if you then inquire further into it, you will find that if you look for the definition of an effect, what it says in dictionaries, well, an effect is a result. But if you look for result is an effect. So it's actually goes round in circles, and you don't really get much wiser from it. Now, the point with that is that maybe, or not maybe, but results, the term results is actually a metaphor. It's a metaphor for something which is good, valuable, which in itself doesn't say anything, which you have to come to grips with and explain. And the problem with a metaphor can be that it sometimes takes up too much attention from the thing itself, the thing that you're interested in. And there might be an opportunity cost to discussing the metaphor and getting to understand the metaphor rather than what the metaphor is really about. So my question here would be, or my hypothesis, that there is the risk that the metaphor takes over the discourse and much of intellectual energy goes into understanding the metaphor rather than the reality that the metaphor is describing. And as a result, the metaphor has its, or you can say as the results metaphor has its origins in disciplines where it is very precisely understood and where it has strong positive connotations, like the ones taught in this house in business administration and economics. But when it travels to other sub-disciplines and other to administrative realities, it comes with a heavy baggage and with a number of connotations. Now, what happens then when a metaphor gets prevalence in the discourse? Well, it may give rise to a more confused discussion. People mean different things when they use the same words, which is confusing. Huge efforts may be spent on trying to clarify and bring semantic order to the system, costly consultancy reports, etc. You get a more abstract discussion and move away from knowing and understanding events on the ground. And perhaps particularly for development cooperation, difficulties in partnerships and language confounds and obscures expectations and achievements in the system. Now, with that bleak picture, is there a way out? Well, the real challenge is, of course, to fund and engage in processes that address global poverty, inequity, security, climate change, etc. Perhaps as a rule of thumb, try speaking about what results actually are, rather than use the word itself. And I would imagine that if you look at the documents from SIDA and count the results word, you would find that result is far more often used today than it was in the past. But there is, of course, a discourse. As I mentioned initially, when I came to SIDA first in 1985, I asked about results, but then we spoke about reality. Now the discourse tends to stay at the level of results, and I think we have become poor of it. So ironically, speaking less about results may actually help us get a clearer understanding of results and to achieve and to learn from results. And then how that connects to you, Janet, and to the cyclosphere is another thing, but I think there's something around the metaphor and the language and what that does to us also needs to be explored. Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, and now we have our last presentator, Anna.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Liljelund Hedqvist, and I work at Develop, Sweden. And I'm very excited to be here today. I have a history working at SIDA, and over the last few years I've been working as a consultant or an advisor. And I participated in the conference 2013, this big push forward conference, and the outcome of that conference, as you know now, is this book that I have actually managed to read most of it, and it's extremely interesting. And I'm going to reflect upon some of the issues in the book based on my experience over the last couple of years working as an advisor with a group of colleagues of mine. And we've been sort of supporting organizations receiving Swedish funding, support from SIDA or Swedish embassies. And we've been working to support them or strengthen their capacity in the area of results. So I'm very much part of this results agenda, problem or solution. Maybe my first comment is a little bit about the results agenda in a Swedish context that I think is maybe important to point out. Maybe not all of you have read the book, but I think it's important to maybe say that SIDA, unlike many other donors, they have a very sort of flexible approach to the results agenda. And even with the example that Janice used, the results summary phase, it was more of a misunderstanding. It's never been a sort of very explicit requirements from SIDA that partner organizations need to use a certain set of tools or methods. So it's been very flexible. And what we've seen as advisors is that this is of course appreciated, but it has also created quite a lot of confusion. How to interpret, what does SIDA want, how can we do it, why don't we get guidelines on how to report, and how to present our programs, and so on. And the first sort of reflection, because when I read the book, there's a lot of familiar feelings. I recognize a lot of these issues that are being raised in the book, also sort of from a Swedish context. And I think the first point that I wanted to mention is the power dimension that Roslin, and it's a red line throughout the book. But I think it's so obvious. All of us working in international development, we are aware of the power dimension. We do power analysis. And it is something that is sort of at the core of development, but still, when it comes to sort of translating the results agenda into practice, it has a tremendous impact. Sort of the power relations between different donors, the donor-recipient relationship. And we see when there is a sort of more of an equal partnership between SIDA and the partner organization, when the organization feel that there is trust in that partnership, they can engage in a meaningful dialogue on results. And we have examples of some sort of strong Swedish NGOs, CSOs, civil society organizations. They have a long history of working with SIDA. They have a lot of experience. They know SIDA. They probably even work at SIDA, so they're quite confident in that dialogue. And they can engage in a meaningful dialogue. But on the other hand, we see sort of weaker organizations that have a lot less experience of working with SIDA. They are more willing to sort of just comply with the requirements. Maybe they have shorter program funding. They have 3-year periods to reach the goals. What we see in these cases is that these organizations tend to develop much sort of over-ambitious results framework. They have a lot of complicated indicators, and they are very eager to do things right. And the power dimension here, I think it's maybe it's so obvious, so it's overlooked, and that's something that I think it's when I read the book, I keep thinking a lot about this, and sort of recognizing that the power dimension is there. I think the book also mentions the transformational dimension of any development initiative. And here I think it's maybe a bit surprisingly some of the organizations that we have worked with, even though we know that them as an organization are very sort of transformative in nature, yet when you look at their programming and the projects, they lack the sort of the transformational character. And using a term from Rosalind, the results artifacts, the different log frames or templates that have been developed over time doesn't seem to have translated into capturing the transformational character programs. It's a lot of activity focus still. So one can say that, yes, it hasn't maybe reinforced the transformational character, but I would also argue that there is definitely potential to use results artifacts to also capture the transformational character programs. It's sort of more how they have been used than in itself, that they don't allow for thinking in terms of how do we move towards a change. And I think the title of today's conference is What Needs to Change, isn't it? So I just wanted to mention a couple of things that I think what needs to change. And sort of in order to avoid that these results artifacts or metaphors around results become meaningless tools that are just being used without any reflective thinking, is to allow the time and resources to really recognize that this is all about, strengthening capacities within an organization. It's not just about using a certain tool, it's about having the capacity and creating that space for an organization to reflect what is meaningful. I think an indicator of a good results information is to ask, is it meaningful? Is this information meaningful to you? And if the answer is no, then it's not a very good information that has been produced. So really, it's allow the time. And you don't do that by sending a consultant for 2 days developing a results framework. And I have done that many times. I think it's really to allow the process of sort of internalize knowledge and really to reflect upon what is suitable for our organization's need. And in order to be able to do that, you also need to have enough. The power needs to be there. You need to sort of be able to own the results agenda that I think can bring a lot of good things. Yes, I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will ask the panelists to come up here. Because now we're going to have our second round of opening up the floor for comments and for questions. Okay, anyone? Yes. Here we have Leonard in the back.
So, thank you very much for very interesting presentations. My name is Rebecca Kitzing-Ivarsson. I'm working at CEDA. Been working as an advisor on results-based management for about 10 years now at CEDA. I think it's ever so interesting that I've heard the words trust and power relations, because I think it's indeed key to the application of results-based management, or what we call this results agenda. And I would like to ask our State Secretary a question. You stressed the importance of trust and dialogue. And I'm very curious to hear your thinking about how could the government actually build trust in the relation with an organization like SIDA, and also how could you encourage us to build trust in our relationship to the agencies that we provide funds to. So how could we build this very important thing in results-based management? Thank you.
Yes, we have the last question also.
Thank you very much. I am slightly coming back to what I talked about before. I think Ulrika made a fantastic presentation on a new way of, a new dimension, coming back to ownership and alignment and harmonization. And in order to implement that, I think that we have to have a different, completely different way of looking at the issue of results. I think that underlying most of what has been said so far, we start from the approach of what do we need as a donor? What does Sweden need? What does the taxpayers need? If we are going to really to implement, participate in transformative development, then I mean we have to start from the idea of what does results, what does change, what does it mean for development in the particular countries where we are acting. And that requires a different way of looking at issues. It has to be relevant not from the donor point of view, as you talked about. It has to be relevant from the part of the recipients. Aid should support the processes, the transformative processes in the country. And it requires a rethinking of the model of results. I mean, results are important, extremely important. But they have to take place in the development where we are actually supposed to support. And that is a different way of thinking. I think that it requires, you have the ministry, you have to put people to think of what does this, if you really want to implement what you presented, what does this really mean for us? How should we define results? Not that we should undermine the results agenda, but we should see what does results actually mean and how should it be results that are useful for development. And these results can then be used of us for presenting to our taxpayers, and they would probably be very happy to see these results.
Okay, thank you. So I think both questions went to State Secretary.
Well, and I think I had a good use of my my colleagues here speaking about also the systems, things that I did not mention. But I think, I mean, a matter of to have a good power analysis, I think this is really, I mean, this is something that we should and want to work with in our international development cooperation. Of course, then we need to work on it with regard to ourselves and our own systems. And the matter of trust is important. And I think that to share risk is one important thing, that we as politicians say that we understand and we know from experience, and this also research and all the practitioners can show that these are complicated matters. And that our taxpayers, if you want to call them that, are fully aware of that this kind of transformational change is complex in any society or politics, as I said, and not least when we work on international development cooperation. So I think that this is one way of starting the discussion. We as politicians know that it's complicated. We all want to achieve results. Of course, we do that. But we need to understand that it's complex and we want to be able to share risk. We as politicians with our colleagues at the ministry with the colleagues at SIDA and other agencies, and they in their turn need to share risk also with their colleagues and partners all over the world, and also with the Swedish different organizations working. But then, I mean, of course, we need also to make good use of the systems, and they have been developing over time, and there's always a possibility to lighten up and to then make, I mean, if we have invested quite a lot in the past 10 years in different systems and methodologies, it's a good opportunity now to see how we can make good use of the parts that work, but not least assure that the systems are good support to the desk officer working, and giving the desk officer both time but also support to do the analytical work. And I fully agree that I also believe that there's less and less time, and this I think many of our colleagues working at the embassies or any organization within development cooperation say that they're much more stuck with their computers than they were some years back, and that this gives less possibility to actually talk about results and methodologies with the partners on the ground and to build on that local ownership that we need to build on. So we need the systems, but they should support then the analytical ability and strengths of the different staff working within development cooperation.
So another one to make a reflection?
Well, you can always take the opportunity to reflect. And then continuing along the lines of your question, Lennart, about knowledge of results. If I may simplify a little bit, there is also a question of where is it that we lack information about results. And I think we have all spoken about the aid agencies and the taxpayers, etc. in the north, but in the south one often knows about the results. If you go into the tax administration in Tanzania, where Swedish capacity building has been occurring for a number of years, they know quite a lot about the results. Or if you turn to the small-scale industry sector, or if you go to Vietnam and talk about macroeconomic policy development, etc. So there's actually a lot of knowledge about results somewhere out there, and that we must remember, of course.
I mean, just to add on to that, because we see that a lot. I mean, maybe if you have to box it into or capture the results with an indicator, it's difficult to do that. But if you freely sort of can use narrative to say, well, this happened and we know about this, and they sort of, and you tell them, well, this is extremely interesting results information, don't you think? And it's like, oh, does it have a value? I didn't know that this was, that we were allowed to use this in our reporting, because we can't really put it into the box. So I think that's, I mean, I agree with you. I think there is a lot of knowledge around results, and lots of results information that maybe is not captured and doesn't reach Ulrika's office.
And I was also thinking, and I read your chapter in the book, that the people working with information, when we talk about the refer to the taxpayers, they very rarely read the reports from SIDA or from the government. I mean, perhaps not even our parliamentarians do that, but they read the newspapers and they read the kind of communication that SIDA and other agencies produce. And as far as I understood, when you have been looking at the way that SIDA produces that kind of information that actually reaches people in Sweden, or could be also elsewhere, that information is perhaps produced more on the basis of storytelling with colleagues than on the basis of the very complex and rigid and time-consuming systems that SIDA has in place. So this is also something to look at. One would like to think that we could create a system that generates both learning for those who are practitioners and professionals, but also that could be used for information towards the broad public or other entities.
Right. Any more? You can think about it. I have some questions. Well, I can ask you all. I was especially thinking of you, Kim, but you're all welcome to say something about this, because you often hear that development aid is a special policy field. With special properties that makes it very complex, and for that reason we should sort of protect it from these kind of steering models. And now you have been doing evaluation within different policy fields, so I guess you can sort of reflect on that kind of notion that this is a very complex. Is it really more complex than other policy fields, and in what ways? So some important ways. I mean, that makes it sort of valid to say that you should projected in that way?
Well, I would say in a way yes and no, and it depends on at what level you evaluate and at what level you consider the policy. If you have a practical evaluation assignment that you are doing for example, DFID in Tanzania or from the World Bank in Peru or whatever, and compare that to doing an evaluation for the labour market board in Sweden or the Analyse or some of the other agencies we have in that field, I would say it probably doesn't differ all that much, because the basics of planning and intervention, setting targets, objectives, achieving those in a complex environment, and all environments are essentially complex. That's a feature of reality. Reality is always complex, and you have to make sense out of that in the evaluation process. So at that sort of nitty-gritty level of doing the evaluation, coming to conclusions around an intervention, it doesn't really differ all that much. That being said, I think if you move further up to look at development cooperation as a policy field, and think that you are going to evaluate, for example, a policy issue like the Swedish government's policies on gender and equity or on climate change or something else, then you raise the level of complexity, because then you're immediately in an environment, in an international environment where you have to take into account the UN system, you have to look at the implementation of the programs in a number of different countries and hence different contexts, etc. So then it becomes a very different ballgame. So it's different than from evaluating a policy initiative in a particular national.
Yeah.
Even though we count our emissions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
In a very precise
way.
So that would mean that you can learn from other policy fields.
Certainly, you can certainly learn from our policy fields. You can learn a lot when you do evaluations or project programs, but I think you can also learn quite a lot when you do policy evaluations.
Because I'm not a specialist in development aid, and when I read this text and this book also, it's very few comparisons. Sort of very closed discussion. Perhaps you can reflect on that also, Rosalind. You don't sort of compare with other policy fields. And I think, for me, this book, for example, it's kind of a struggle to make the politicians or decision makers to hear about the problems. And I think that struggle would gain if you could show that these problems are not only within this policy field, are common problems. We are not inventing these problems. Sometimes I think the critics to the critics say that they just complaining in their profession, you know. But you can use these experience from the other policy fields to strengthen your argument. Any comments on that?
Can I reply to that?
Yes.
In my chapter 2, which I didn't talk about,
okay.
I have a chapter 2 on the history of evidence and results, which is on the principle that a lot of people in the aid system it arrived, it felt it was hitting them. Where did it come from? So it's trying to unpack where it came from. So that chapter puts what's going on in the international aid system within the broader historical context of the evolution of new public management, more generally, but also takes you right back to the 19th century, where I was fascinated to learn that payment by results in the British education system in the mid-19th century, where school teachers got paid for how many students passed their exams in the elementary schools. And of course there was an enormous amount of gaming taking place, which is one issue which has been very much discussed in Britain with reference to our National Health Service, the gaming that comes out of these quantifiable results related to targets. So I do talk about it in that chapter, as does Chris Roche in his chapter. The book is focusing on the aid system as an example of a broader environment where particular approaches to results and evidence have been evolving over the years. I think it's worth repeating the point I made before. I argue in my chapter that the effect of the results agenda was more exaggerated in the international aid system than in domestic policy sectors because of in the domestic policy sectors, the citizens who are meant to be benefiting from health or education, whatever, are also the taxpayers. And they can, in democratic systems, they can hold Parliament and the government accountable, including saying, wait a minute, this is mad, this is rubbish, you know, why didn't I have my health operation because there was a target which had to be achieved, and so on and so forth. In the international aid system, the citizens, the rights holders, as Ulrika said, are elsewhere in the world. And they don't have a direct line to hold northern donors accountable. The citizens here in Sweden find it very difficult to hold the government accountable for what they're doing in aid because they have no direct experience of it. And this encourages the development of these technologies, which nobody kind of float away from reality, as I think Kim has already mentioned. So there is something special about how the new public management agenda overall plays out in the international aid system.
But just as I said, the government has identified that this is a problem that needs to be addressed in many areas of politics, and this is why the Ministry of Finance has taken on board the project of looking at the systems of new public management in several areas of politics. And I'm quite sure that also, we know from the Swedish debate that teachers and doctors also think that they spend too much time by the computer filling in forms than they do with their patients or with their students. But yes, I fully agree that there's the relations of accountability are different with the international setting of development cooperation.
We have a question.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps in the 11th hour. My name is Anna Liljelund, and I now work with the MENA unit with water, but previously I actually worked with qualitative approaches to monitoring and results. And I was thinking, I haven't heard much here today about the qualitative aspects of results and how we try to measure them, or how they sometimes are not reported because they aren't apples and pears. And they take a long time to find out. It means that we have to go out to the field. Somebody was pointing out that SIDA is not so much in the field any longer. That's true. And if we really want the results that perhaps matter for people who live in our partner countries, then we ought to take the time and the effort to actually talk to them. We did initiate some years ago so-called reality checks as an initiative from SIDA. And they have been going in Bangladesh and a few other countries. And they've been quite appreciated outside of SIDA, I would say. Whereas within SIDA, they haven't fitted into the sort of reporting procedures. So I still have that feeling now when I work with the MENA portfolio, that sometimes the real and lasting change for people are not being reported because they don't fit into the format. And if you would like to comment, the authors of the book, whether you're actually addressing this or whether it's a new question to be asked in the new book or in the...
Well, I've written about it elsewhere. I've argued that the international aid system has actually, in many cases, actually done a lot of good, but it's not what gets reported on. That people, country program officers, are doing one thing and they report up the system something else. And so it's hidden. The change, the good change that is getting supported is made invisible, which is a bad thing, because increasingly the risk of the results agenda is that we finish up by designing projects and programs that fit what can be counted, which may be what is not important. And so it's in English you say you finish up with the tail wagging the dog. So the dog needs to be made more visible. Yeah.
Anna, you wanted to comment on that?
No, I wanted to comment on that because I think it's, I mean, you touched upon an important area, and I think you mentioned the SIDA reality checks, but I think also, I mean, within the organizations themselves, because they often have this knowledge, but I would say sort of working with them, and there is a lot of interesting initiatives ongoing now, where organizations develop a monitoring system that really captures the qualitative part of the work. So there is a lot of learning going on presently, and I think there are certain methods that better captures this. And I would definitely argue that if you sort of move away from the sort of the whole use of results, agenda, concepts, the way you speak more in terms of, so what would a change in behavior in this, with this type of actors look like? You can speak freely and say, well, it will look like this, and they would act this way, and try to capture that change when you formulate your results. Starting by the change that you want to see, you are much more likely to measure the right things and not measure the things that are easy to measure. So I would say there's a lot of things ongoing, and there's, I mean, a lot of good Swedish organizations that have well-advanced systems that capture this, and also internationally, and there will be interesting initiatives. But maybe not for the donor organization primarily, but within the organizations themselves and within their networks and partnerships. So very interesting things happening.
Yes, well, maybe two comments in relation to this. One is that we've spoken a little bit about measurement, but not too much. I think one has to realize that the measure is in itself, again, nothing. A measure is a symbol and a scale, but you have many different kinds of scale, and what it means to put something on a scale is actually quite sophisticated and has to be properly understood when you speak about it. What is more interesting in the practice of thinking about development cooperation and what it achieves or does not achieve is to assess what has been happening. And almost always when I see people talking about measurement and measuring results, I say that's not what you ought to do. You ought to think about it, you ought to assess it, not measure it. That being said, I think there's also this discussion about quantitative and qualitative data, which again I would hope not to hear again in a way, because there is no such simple thing as qualitative or quantitative data, because you have both. When you have something like a rating on a scale, you have a number, but that is actually a qualitative assessment in the very beginning that you quantify when you put it on the scale. Sometimes it's something else, but the process of thinking about it is almost always qualitative. Hence that distinction and that discussion about what's qualitative and quantitative, I think, could be left to the side.
Yes. You want a qualitative analysis of the quantitative data?
Yes. And vice versa.
Yeah, vice versa.
Any more questions? We have in the back. And we have in the back. Yeah, yes.
Thanks. I'm Lisa Roman. I just returned to SIDA, so I may be saying something ignorant, with a witness of my ignorance. But I was thinking, one wants results to have more, to know what's been going on and what's been successful and what hasn't been successful, and then one should think that should influence decision making at the end, so we know how to allocate resources. And then I was just reflecting on we just received a new budget for next year, and I work at the research support division at SIDA, and so we have received less funding this year compared to last year. And although SIDA budget has grown in total. And so then I'm thinking, is this a reflection of lacking results, or since research support is such a long-term activity that it's difficult to measure quickly what effect it has had? Or is it just a result of other political considerations, because we know that all these are going on, and in that case, what are the results for? So that's my question.
If we take the other question too.
Hello again, I'm still Rebecca Kidsing at CEDA. I actually have a question to Rosalind, if I may. I wonder, because you have referred to the results agenda a couple of times, and I wonder, since I haven't had the pleasure of reading your book yet, so I wonder, do you provide a definition of the results agenda? Because I personally think that there's a problem that this whole concept of results-based management, results agenda, is so broad. I think it's a completely different story if you talk about somebody, an entity is trying to steer another entity through the means of results-based management. Or if there is, within one entity, one organization, you try this approach in order to continuously improve your operations. And what I've seen in my sort of methods work or advisory that I provided is that when you use it for the continuous learning within an organization, it can really, really work. But the problem is that if one talks too broadly, generally about results agenda, results-based management does not work. There is this risk that some people do not even try it for their continuous learning or continuous improvements.
Okay, can we start with the first question?
I think I need to answer. And you got me there because I started to say that we need to have a knowledge-based development cooperation, and then you said, and you're the first one to bring it up. I was waiting for a question after that we presented the budget, that we don't present the full budget line as we did previously for our research within development cooperation. But it is more, as you said, a result of other priorities and the lack of possibility to develop the full. When we present the government system is like this, that we have strategies and we have a range with the possibility to lower a bit and to increase a bit. And because of budget restraints within the development aid budget, that will be even more concerning next year, or even with this budget that we presented with regard to the relation with refugee and asylum costs for the first year. It is less for the research budget as that we presented. But we hope that we can plan for more further on, that it will not be next year.
You want to answer the question?
Rebecca, when I first started my career as a development professional, I was one of the first people to use the logical framework, right? And I thought it was brilliant because it actually, for the first time, addressed issues. The British aid programme at that time, they'd say there's a lot of fish in the Red Sea, so let's have a fishing project, right? And what the logical framework did is stop looking whether there's a lot of fish or whatever, actually said, what are the issues facing the people on the Red Sea coast? And is there anything we can do to support, enhance the livelihoods of people living on the Red Sea, right? So the logical framework enabled us to focus on people, livelihoods, issues around that, rather than saying there's fish, look at the import. I mean, worst case is we have 12 old Land Rovers, let's have a project to use the Land Rovers. So the results in that sense was an enormous leap forward in thinking, actually, of aid projects from then and now. What went wrong is that it became a discourse which shut out all the. It became what Kim's actually said. The results agenda, as it became used in much of the international aid system, is, as Kim put it, a misplaced metaphor. It travelled. So results was being used as if it was like the bottom line results on an accountant's balance sheet, or even sometimes used like the results you get in a laboratory experiment. But when you're trying to enable people to enhance their livelihoods or realise their rights, then it's misplaced, and so it began to distort. It began to distort the way that we were thinking about what we could do, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and how to do it. And we began to lose, importantly, the how. Now, the old log frame, when it was initially used, with the assumptions column that looked at, okay, what is the context in which we, as one of many other actors, are trying to contribute to a process of change. It disappeared. So these technologies, Janet calls technologies, they gain a life of their own, and from being useful, flexible tools for helping us think with and learn with, become tyrannical instruments. And that's what we were trying to address in the book.
Yes, it was a nice ending perhaps in this day. Or do we have a final question? We have a final question.
I'm called Raymond Likomana. I'm a project manager in Rwanda for a SIDA supported program at the University of Rwanda. And I'm a PhD student in accounting at Orebro University. So my question is, I mean, if you hear about this discussion about result and the result agenda, you think that it coerces people more than it enables people, at least the people who are supported. And my question is it the result agenda which has a problem? Is it the process of developing those results within the different countries that are supported the issue, or it's just the whole implementation process of this concept of research agenda? And if that is the case, I would address my question to Ulrika. How is that the context specific? I mean, if Sweden is supporting, let's say, Rwanda, how is that taken into consideration from the specific aspect of the country itself, rather than generalizing the model to all the countries that are supported by Sweden? Thanks.
Well, I think it goes back to what I said before, that there is a very important process where we look for local ownership, and that we have had for a period even a situation where we were just about to offer results from Sweden and not doing so in a good dialogue with our partner countries, and then bringing in the context, the local context, and also other actors working. So I think that this is why I emphasize the importance of getting back to the dialogue with the partner country, but also with the other actors within the partner countries. I mean, not only the aid effectiveness agenda, but also the development effectiveness agenda, bringing in other actors, and base the Swedish possible offer of a contribution towards a result that's decided by the people locally, also in relation to other actors that are there. The importance there than to coordinate with other donors. But at the same time, I think, I mean, it has been a very political discussion about this, and I think that even though when this is presented also in the chapter of Janet, that the former government was focusing a lot, I mean, this is also brought experience to the system, and as I said before, it's possible now to see what has been good about the thing that has been developed, and then get back to some of the really main core aspects of what we know. And I think that the development effectiveness agenda is based very much on research and good experience, so I think we should get back to that, but also make good use of what has been developed during the past years. And I think that, I mean, even in SIDA and other agencies, you find a lot of different experience also during these past year, also with the former government. I mean, it's not as if everything has been done wrong in the past years, but there are, as you say, experiences of different projects, of results harvesting, or that we can really make good use of. But what is important is to really, and this has been said also by Kim, I mean, to have the time to understand the local context and the change. That we want to support how we can do that in the best way, together with other partners, not only with the local country government, but also with other actors of change.
Okay, thank you. And that will be the final words, because now we are very close to 4 o'clock, and we would like to thank the panel. thank everyone coming here, making this a very interesting day, and I hope you have found it fruitful and that you have found some experience that you can use to make things better. That was the aim. So thank you, everyone.
Ja,